Hello, friends, and welcome to our third lecture in this Introduction to English Literature course. As you all know, in this course we study literary works within their historical context. In our previous lectures, we discussed Old English. We talked about the themes and the features. We talked about how Old English was oral, how it was narrative, how we heard many voices, either like personal voices, religious voices, or even collective voices. We talked about the themes of battles and religion. We also talked about some personal poetry that was written in the Old English. Now we're going to talk about the Middle English. As we are moving to Middle English, we are actually, guys, talking about a society that is being developed. We are talking about a society that is trying to form its own like English identity. We said before that people came to England from all over Europe, this was England, and people came from all over Europe to England in the Old English era. And now in the Middle English, people try to settle down. They try to have their own society. As the nature or the society is changing in England, we should know that literature would also change as well. So the themes will be different. The form and the style of literature will be different because people are not only or do not only care about just like literature in general, do not care about like just religious things or battles and wars and stuff. No, people are trying to settle down in England, and they are trying to form their own identity. They want to feel that sense of belonging to a place. They want to have some common interests, some common issues, and to have harmony with the people in England. Okay, so, guys, remember last time when we talked about English literature, when we talked, sorry, about Old English, we discussed the features and then we discussed some works or some literary works that were dominant at that age. Now, today, we are going to do actually the opposite. So, we will start with one very, very important work for the English literature at that time in the Middle English. And then we will get back to the features and apply them or reflect on how that work represents the era. Okay, so when we talk about Middle English, we talk about, or especially like early Middle English, we talk about like the most important figure at that time, which is, or sorry, who is Geoffrey Chaucer. So we talk about Geoffrey Chaucer. Geoffrey Chaucer, guys, was or is still considered the father of English literature and poetry. This is how important he is. He as a figure of English language literature, he was considered and he is still considered the father of English poetry and English literature. Why? Because he was working on, or he was one of the first people who were working on developing the English identity and like um, and having that sense of belonging for people. Okay, so um, we are going to talk about Geoffrey Chaucer now, but like just have a general glance or uh, some points about Geoffrey Chaucer. As I told you, he's considered the father of English literature. He was influenced by both European literary models as well as old ones. So, as we said, people came from all over Europe to England. So, we know that from Old English, people were they were like influenced by French or Latin culture. So, of course, he was influenced as well by European literary models and Old English ones. Okay, Chaucer describes a society that was rapidly changing. In the work of Chaucer that we're going to talk about now, you will see how he discusses um, parts of the society that represent like how people changed from. We will see how people changed from like Old English to now. How a knight, remember the word knight, like a soldier, a person who holds like a sword and fights in battles. He described how that soldier or knight changed from Old English to the Middle English and so on. So he described a society that was rapidly changing because, as we said, the England English society was moving towards settling down and having their own identity. Chaucer gave a wide picture of his society because he talked about different people. He discussed some aspects of the society that no one before talked about. We will see how in a second. And he uses something called irony to expose his society. We will understand this in a second when we go into his work. You should know the word irony. We will discuss it later. And to expose his society. Chaucer was very, very famous for his irony, guys. Okay. Okay. Now, when we talk about Chaucer, we talk about his biggest work ever, or his most famous work, which is the Canterbury Tales. The Canterbury Tales, okay, I will just give you a general idea about it and then we will go into details. The Canterbury Tales is like it's a very, very interesting piece of work. It's like a story about storytelling, okay? So again, it's like the idea itself behind this Canterbury Tales, it's a story, but it's about storytelling. How? It talks about a narrator who is in an N I double N. This is called an N I double N. Okay, so a narrator who was in an N, and then this narrator goes along with all these people who I believe were in that N. They travel together into a place called Canterbury. Again, we have a narrator. We remember the word narrator, someone who tells us the story. So we have a narrator, and this narrator travels along with all these people to a place called Canterbury. The act of traveling all together here on horses, going to a place for doing something is called pilgrimage. I will show you the word in a second. Pilgrimage. Anyways, so you just need to know that they were traveling to a place, okay? They were in an inn and then they all ride their horses and travel to a place called Canterbury. Now, because their trip is very, very long, they decide on telling some stories, okay? So they decide on telling some stories. In this here, like in this trip, we have some knights, we have some nuns, we have some regular people, some philosophers. Like we have people from all over England, from like different professions or different jobs. We will see this later. So in their trip, each one of them start telling a story. Each one of them start telling a story in order to make the time like pass faster and in order to entertain themselves, and they wanted to see who can tell a better story. Okay, so this is just the whole idea behind the Canterbury Tales. Again, people are traveling to Canterbury, so in their way, they start telling stories. Each one of them that he starts or she starts telling stories, and they tell stories to pass the time or to entertain themselves and to like have a competition on who can tell a better story. Okay, so this is just like a general idea. In the Canterbury Tales, you should know some things about it. The poem is a series of 24 stories, although Chaucer planned it to be 120. So it's like um, an unfinished work or a piece of work. He wanted to make it like 120 stories. Can you believe how big it would be? But instead, it was just 24 stories. So, like 24 people told their stories. Okay, settings of the story that I just told you. The time, it was spring. The place, pilgrimage. Pilgrimage means like a long trip, a long trip from an inn, this is the word inn that I said it, to Canterbury. Characters, all ranks of society except the very poor and the very rich. So you can see how Chaucer here tried to represent, sorry, all all parts of the society. So all the ordinary people that the old English did not talk about. He did not talk about the like kings and queens and stuff. No, he just talked about all ranks of society. So, if like soldiers, regular people, all parts of society, okay? And some of the stories are modern, other are classical. We will see this in a second. Okay, so we can start now with the first one. We will discuss, guys, four of the stories, and you should know that, for example, when I say the philosopher's story, there would be like someone like this called like a philosopher, and he would be telling us the story. So we will hear it from the narrator, the original narrator that we talked about in the first place. So for example, the philosopher's story means that there is a philosopher and he tells the story. The nun's story, it means that there is a nun and she tells a story, blah blah. So this is why it's a story about stories inside. Okay, so let's start with the first one. Guys, when I say the word story, I don't here mean like a story that we already know, okay? Most parts of the Canterbury Tales were actually written in poetry. Okay, so when I say like a story, I mean the story of this poetry or piece of poetry. And some parts of the Canterbury Tales were written in prose. We discussed the word prose and poetry before. So let's start with the first one, which is the philosopher's tale. I want you to look at this. You have this in your book, and this is the simplified version or the simpler version. So let's just read it, and then we will discuss who's a philosopher. What does it mean? Let's see. Um, I want you to try to read it yourself, but albeit that he was a philosopher, yet had he but little gold in coffer. Oh, okay. So I can read that. See how this is different from Old English. In Old English, we didn't know any words. We couldn't read it at all. But here it's much easier to read. It's much clearer. Okay. So and of course, even if you don't understand some of the words, you can see that the general idea can be understood. We know most of the words and we can understand it, not like the Old English. Let's see the simplified version. Again, the philosopher's tale. But although he was a philosopher, nevertheless, he had only a little gold in his coffer. A philosopher, guys, is a man of knowledge. So when I say a philosopher, I'm talking about a man of knowledge who does not care about money or who seeks knowledge, not money. Okay? So, before we dive deeper into the meaning of these lines, let's look at the form of as we said, like we start with the form and then with the theme. Let's look at the form. What do you notice here? Do we have a caesura like in the middle of the line? Do we have a caesura? No. So we can see that, oh, in the Middle English, the caesura started to disappear, kind of. Okay, so the first thing, we don't really have a caesura. Another thing we can notice, at the end of these two lines, guys, just a notice here or a note here. We have when we have like two lines, we call them couplets. When we have two lines of poetry, we call them a couplet. Okay, I just want you to know this. So when we have here two sounds that rhyme, and the same goes for this, like a philosopher, a kafir, we say we have rhyme. So we don't have a caesura and we have rhyme. Okay, so this is for the form. Let's see the theme. Here he's saying, but although he was a philosopher, he's saying about this, he is a philosopher and he only had a little gold in his coffer like his drawer. So this philosopher, he's saying, this philosopher did not care much about money. He only cared about his knowledge. He was a philosopher. He had just a little gold, like not that much money. Okay? Again, he's a philosopher, but he only had a little money in his drawer or in his coffer. So he's saying that a philosopher is a person who seeks knowledge, not money. Okay, so this is I want you to notice like the theme of this part. As people tried to be civilized, tried to look for new identity, we noticed that here some new people started showing. People started having new jobs, not only like monks or warriors or knights or things like this. No, we started seeing new jobs which are like a philosopher, for example. So a philosopher is now a new job. Why? Because people started moving to England in order to settle down. They wanted to be civilized. They wanted to have their own identity. They wanted to form a society. And in this society, we started seeing new jobs, such as a philosopher. Okay, so as for now, we talked about the form in general, we talked about the theme in general. Now we will discuss the part of the irony that we said earlier. Irony. Okay, let's see. Now, uh, at the first glance, when we first look at this, at these two lines, we will see, but although he was a philosopher, nevertheless, he had only little gold in his coffer. The general meaning or the first meaning that comes to your mind is a philosopher is a person who seeks knowledge and he has only little gold, so he doesn't really care about money. So, this is the meaning that first comes to your mind. However, if you dive deeply into these words, you will notice that this philosopher had a little gold. This means that it's not that he doesn't care about money. He had a little gold. A little gold is still a lot of money. A little gold. Now, when I say, for example, someone has a little gold or someone has a little money, it still means that he has lots of, like, a little gold means lots of money. So that philosopher really had lots of money, um, but he was trying to show that no, he only cared about knowledge. Again, when we first look at the two lines, we will like directly think that, oh, a philosopher is a person who doesn't really care about money. But when we dive deeper and look at these words like a little gold, oh my god, a little gold is still lots of money. So he does care about money, and this is what we call an irony. An irony, it means that the author or the narrator here says something, but he means another thing. Again, an irony means to say something, but to mean something else. An irony is to say something, but to mean something else. So he said that he's a man of knowledge and he doesn't care about money. But what he really means from these two words is that he does care about money and he is just pretending not to care about money. Okay? You will understand irony more when we go to other tales. So you should know that the philosopher here is actually not doing his job, and the poet is being ironic. The poet is being ironic. The philosopher is being a hypocrite. Hypocrite to show something other than what you mean inside. Now, what's the difference? If you can notice here, the difference between this philosopher and Beowulf, for example. When we talked about Beowulf, we talked about how he sacrificed himself for the sake of his people. He didn't care about he like didn't care about anything personal. He only cared about his people. But here, people started being selfish, and they started caring about themselves and caring about their own personal interest. This is why the philosopher is or cares only about his own personal interest. Another thing you should know, guys, is that people usually during wars, like in Old English, during wars they are united usually, okay? But once they settle down and once everything is just like at peace, people start being selfish and they start caring only about themselves, okay? As I said, you will understand the irony much better in a second when we talk about more examples. Let's see the second part or another story in the Canterbury Tales, which is the nun's tale. Now, this is a nun. Okay, this is a nun. You know the word nun. We discussed it before. So, this is the word. This is a nun, and we are going to talk about what the nun said or described in the Canterbury Tales. Now, who in her way of smiling was very unaffected and modest, and all was sentiment and tender heart. This is the nun's tale. The nun is, of course, like a female monk, kind of. She dedicates herself to church. She does not marry. She does not love anyone, and I mean, like any male figure in her life. No, she dedicates herself only to the church. We can notice here that we have a woman for the first time in the history of English language. We have a woman, and she's not only mentioned in poetry. No, she's actually she's being like a heroine. A heroine is like a hero, but for female, for a female. So she is being the heroine in this story. It's like a story of the nun. So it was something new for the English literature to mention or to have a heroine that is a female. Okay, so you can understand here that in the Middle English, women started showing in poetry and they started taking main parts. Um, from okay, I want you to look at these two lines. From the first two lines, from the first line especially, you can notice the word modest. Modest, when I say like a nun is a modest person. She's modest. She wears like the veil. She wears this outfit. She's modest. She does not love any male figures. She dedicates herself to church. We talk about her, let's say, behaviors. She's a modest person. Okay, so from the first glance, from the first time we look at these two lines, we will understand that, oh, okay, so we are giving some good traits, some good features for this nun. She is modest and she has a tender heart. Okay, so she's just a woman. You should know, guys, that women at that time they were controlled by men. They were abused and they were not given their freedom as they are supposed to. So they were controlled by men. They were always abused, and this is why they did not even show in literature. In this, in these two lines, as I said, the general meaning, she's a modest person. If you look closely, we have the word sentiment and we have a tender heart. Sentiment, you know the meaning of the word sentiment? When I say sentiment, it means feelings of love, feelings of love, or feelings in general. When I say she's sentiment, she has some feelings of love. So it's the same idea, but like she's a nun, she's not supposed to have these feelings of love for men or for anything or for anyone. So she's supposed to only dedicate herself to church, but no, she's sentiment. She has feelings of love. So that just like the idea of the philosopher, where Chaucer says something, but he means something else, it's the same thing here. The nun is supposed to be dedicated to church, but no, she cares about her emotions more. And this is the other irony here. Irony is that the poet says something, but he means something else. Here he says she's modest, but at the same time, the irony is that no, she's not modest. She cares about herself. She cares about her feelings. We should ask ourselves here, why? Why is she being sentiment? Why is she being sentiment, or why is this ironic? Some people might say, "Oh, she's being abused and she's rejecting her society." So why she's being sentiment? She's rejecting her society. She refuses to follow what people tells her to follow, which is like to dedicate herself to church. Some other people might say, "Oh, she's a strong woman. She's rebellious." You know the word rebellious, to not accept what your society tells you and to rebel against them. Some other people say, maybe or may say, she is trying to resist the rules of the church. Some others might say, no, well, maybe she's trying to have her own voice. She's voiceless because how men control her. So she's trying to have her own voice. And some others would just say, no, she's just a hypocrite, just like the philosopher. You see how the philosopher was, he tried to show that he cares about knowledge, but no, what he cares about is money. The same goes for the nun. Okay, so she's pretending to be modest, but no, she's sentiment and she feels the feelings of love. This is the nun style. Let's see another person and the same Canterbury Tales. Guys, this lecture is recorded, so if there's any part that you don't understand, you can just go back to it and repeat it or understand it a little bit uh, slowly, okay, or slower. And therefore, let's see the original text. And therefore, at the king's court, my brother, each man for himself, there is none other. Oh, okay. So we also can understand lots of words from this Middle English language. In this knight's tale, this is a knight, as I told you. A knight is like a soldier, a person who holds his sword and goes. The job of the knight is just like Beowulf, to fight, to protect. If we look at these lines, and therefore at the king's court, kin, it's the same as king. So at the king's court like a palace, or not like a palace literally, but like the place where the king lives. At the king's court, each man for himself, there is no other. Okay, so each man for himself, there is no other. Oh, so this part means that for the night, each man for himself, there is no other person to care about but myself. So as a knight, each man for himself. كل واحد مع نفسه. There is no one to care about but myself. Oh, so you're a knight and you're being selfish? This doesn't make sense. This is not the knight that we know from Beowulf and from Old English. So maybe Chaucer is trying to say knights don't belong to this age anymore. Knights are only for the past, and they don't belong to today's world. They don't belong to today's society. So we can see here how he's trying to expose his society and give a realistic image. It's no more the image of the knight of Beowulf, the hero, the idealistic person, the most idealistic person who sacrifices himself. No, now we're having a realistic image of a hero, and like the heroic image of the old English Beowulf is turned into a realistic image in the Middle English Chaucer. Okay, so you can see here that each man for himself, there is no other. As a knight, I don't care about anyone else, I just care about myself. And now we will move to the last part that we will discuss from the Canterbury Tales, or uh, the last short story. What is this world? What do men ask for? Now with his love, now in his cold grave, alone without any companionship. The narrator is asking about, or asks about, like the human beings in general. So you can see that even if I don't give you, even if I don't tell you that these lines are from the Canterbury Tales, you would not guess that these are from the Canterbury Tales and from the Middle English, because poetry is universal, and the language and the questions asked here are actually like 21st century questions. So it's like he's asking, what is this life? What do people want? What do men ask for? So these are questions of the 21st century. This is why we say poetry is universal, and Chaucer himself is universal, and Chaucer is the father of English literature, because the questions that he proposes in his poetry are meant for all the ages and for all times. This is why we are saying, like, poetry is universal. Again, what is this world? What do men ask for? It means what does or what do men mean, like human beings, want from this life? Okay, so these are the four parts that we will discuss from Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Now I will just get back to um, the features of Middle English and the themes of Middle English in order to discuss some of the things together. Now, in the features of Middle English, you should know that the hero became a man of romance. As you saw before in the Old English, the hero was a man who only cared about sacrificing himself for the sake of his people. He cared about battles and wars and stuff. But here, no, he just became a, a man of romance. Also, you should know that in the Middle English, love poetry flourished. People started, as I said before, looking for new themes because they started settling down. So, love poetry flourished. They started talk about their love, and in some parts of the Canterbury Tales that we did not mention here, Chaucer talked about love and talked about romance as well. Women began to appear more in poetry, and this is very important. As women began in the Middle English to appear in poetry, they started to have their own voices. I mean, yes, we mostly did not, we couldn't like hear her talk, but at the same time, from the actions of the nun, for example, from the actions of the nun, we can see how she was trying to reject her society's rules. She was trying to defy what the society imposed on her. Again, women began to have their own voices in the Middle English, because of course before they were abused. And for the themes, guys, you should know that we started talking about love, about money, about hypocrisy, and change in general, because we said that people try to settle down instead of just having wars and uh, and all these things. So, as for the hypocrisy, as I told you here, some people might say, "Oh no, the nun, she appeared to be modest, but no, she's a hypocrite person, and she has some feelings of love for men. So no, she's not modest. So she's a hypocrite." Some people might say so. This is for the theme. But they were mainly objects of desire and perfection. So when women were portrayed, they were objects of desire. Objects of desire, it means that she was objectified. She was just shown, or she was just like portrayed to entertain men. Okay, she was portrayed to entertain men. Women were created, this is how they thought women were created to please men. Only later women began to take main roles, such as in Chaucer's work, and were treated as humans with feelings. Okay, more features of English for the influences versus English identity. Now, Italian and French literatures began to influence English writers, and we said this also in the Old English. But you should notice that the language became much clearer, right? Because we could read the Old English, and this is what Chaucer tried to do. He tried to emphasize the English identity. He tried to emphasize the English language, not only give Latin or French words or French language. But the desire to begin pure English literature was getting stronger. This is why we talked about Chaucer. Chaucer, he was the person who tried to develop and to encourage the use of this English language and literature. England was developing or constructing in its own national identity. Sorry, its own national identity, as we said before. Ballads and songs became common. Ballads and songs became common. I want you to look this word up. Ballads are songs that people usually sing together in order to like emphasize their national identity, for example. So ballads are usually songs that narrate stories. Okay, so when we sing, when we like sing a poem, we said that poems were written to be sung. So some of these poems, when they narrate stories, like parts of the Canterbury Tales, we call them ballads. Okay, wars and epidemics were still raging. So, although we talked about all the new features and new English identity things, wars and epidemics were still happening at that time. And we guys discussed some other things while we were talking about Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. We said how, in the form, for example, the caesura started disappearing. We said how new techniques were used, such as using the irony instead of only like praising or lamenting um, or all of these like old English things, because people became more intelligent and we wanted people to think. So, not only to look at the two lines and think, oh, okay, so a philosopher is a person who cared about knowledge. No, people became more intelligent and they cared about reading what's between the lines. So, people started using irony, and Chaucer was, of course, one of the first people to perfect this irony. Okay. Also, if you remember how we discussed before, like the perfect heroes in Old English, here we are talking about some realistic people, realistic knights, not only perfect soldiers and perfect knights and stuff. No, we are talking about realistic people. This is why the knight was actually saying, "Oh, I care about myself, no other man." Chaucer began to, as I said before, he began his Canterbury Tales, or he planned his Canterbury Tales to be 120 stories, but he ended up writing 24 stories. Okay, I mentioned this because I wanted to get back to the idea of spring. If you remember, when we talked about like the Canterbury Tales, I told you that it was in spring. Do you have any idea why? I want you to think about it for a second. When we talk about spring, we are talking about a new beginning. We are talking about regeneration. We are talking about rebirth, a new life, a new new hope for a new life. And this is what or this is why Chaucer chose spring to write his poetry in. So the poem, as I said, or the whole work was written or portraying spring, a trip or a pilgrimage that happened during the spring to show regeneration, to show rebirth, or to show new life or a beginning of a good new life. Um, this is all what we will discuss today. We have something related to King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, but we will discuss it next time, hopefully. Thank you guys so much for attending today's lecture. If you have any questions, if you have anything that you would like to ask, please write it down, and in our live lecture we can discuss it later. Thank you very much, and hopefully I will see you later.